This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. This week, we are going to play for you the interview I did with Walter Koenig, which I think is super fun. But first, we've got some news to cover, mostly about production, Star Trek production specifically, obviously, starting to get back up and running.
Yeah, well, last week, I think, was the first week we covered the end of the writer's strike and the actor's strike, right?
Yeah, we were celebrating.
Yeah. But we didn't know what was going to happen when. We were speculating, are they going to be able to do anything before the end of the year? It turns out, yeah. So Strange New Worlds has restarted pre-production. They were in pre-production when the writer's strike kicked off in May. And they've started again. Chris Fisher, who was a guest on this podcast, said, he and his guys were constantly planning on how to restart. And I think over the weekend, he said, I'm heading back to Toronto. He's back there now.
Yeah, he said, I'm going in 3 days. I mean, when we talked to him, he was like, we're ready, man.
So they're in pre-production. They're going to start actual production apparently on the 11th, according to the Directors Guild. I have confirmed that, the plan is to shoot this year. So it looks like they could probably get one episode done this year before Christmas. It's going to be tight because it usually takes 2 weeks to film an episode. Especially during, I'm not sure what the level of the COVID protocols are. They're not as severe as they used to be, but
they're still part of the equation for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just Chris, Jess Bush has been probably the most prolific. She's kind of crowdsourcing her way back to Toronto.
Right. Like someone to take her apartment where she lives and then somewhere to put a car or something in Toronto, something like that.
Yeah. She needs a covered parking spot in Toronto in the winter. You'd think you'd want like an indoor spot, really, because you're still, I guess, covered's enough. You've lived there. Yeah, you don't want to be digging out. That's the issue.
Right. I was just there last weekend, actually. Well, last winter they got almost no snow, so I suspect that she doesn't have to worry about that.
I suspect they're going to do a lot on the AR wall because they're going to be shooting from December through to May and June, essentially. That's going to cover some of those snowy months for sure.
Right.
Can they turn it around in time to show us any Strange New Worlds in 2024? I mean, I wouldn't count on it, but it's possible.
I think it's possible. And they might get ambitious about it. No show benefits from long gaps between seasons.
That's true, but there's just a physical limitation. It depends on how much stuff was done during the strikes. The fact that they're using the air wall so much means they've got a lot of effects work done. They might have done some visual effect work during the strikes. Certainly they could have restarted that in September after the writer's strike ended. I'm talking about space shot stuff.
Right, like stuff that the people who need to approve it weren't working during the writer's strike, but were working during the actor's strike.
But if you look at the past couple seasons, from the day they start shooting to the day of the premieres, it's been roughly 15 to 16 months. So pulling it off in less than 12, I think, and I wouldn't mind this, if they broke it up into two halves. I think we're going to see a lot of that in 2024.
Yeah, I think so too.
On Paramount and Netflix and other. I mean, Netflix has been they did this recently with The Witcher, and they did that with Stranger Things. So seeing that kind of thing happen, I think Trek fans will be fine with that, especially if it means getting it earlier.
Right. And then the other thing we do know about Strange New Worlds is that Frakes is going to be directing. He's been talking about being headed to Toronto, but he didn't say when, but we know he's going to do at least one episode.
He directs everything, so he's got to direct Strange New Worlds season 3. He didn't direct in season 1, I guess, because he had a conflict with another Star Trek show. But
yeah, I think that he was doing too much Star Trek so that he couldn't do all the Star Trek.
I wonder if he's going to direct for the Academy show, because that's going to be a very different show. They're probably going to want a very young, diverse group of directors. But I bet he's going to be like the one who isn't a young, diverse director that they bring in. He'd be the one old guy, old
He's
school
not
guy.
That old, yeah.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. I'm just being silly. Yeah, no, and I think it's I think it would make sense to bring him in because he's the Star Trek vet that people would be excited about. Plus, he's just a joy to have on set, and he brings everything on time, and he knows how to make it work. So you want that. And then you can also have a bunch of other people who are maybe come from different backgrounds.
I look forward to seeing the team behind that show, the writer's room, and, we know who's running the show. We know Alex is in the writer's room. We know Tawny, but not sure how many other writers we know. And then there's slate of directors and the rest of the team. So we really don't know that much about that show.
Well, I interviewed Tawny Newsome today, as you know, and she said that there are a bunch of really big Star Trek fans in that writer's room, and canon police like her, she said.
You're such a name dropper.
Yeah, I was just talking to Tawny Newsome a couple hours ago, and she said, Laurie, I need to tell... No, that wasn't how it went, but but that is what she said.
One of the other fun things in our article on Jonathan Frakes is because the strikes are over, people start suddenly remembering, oh yeah, I was on Star Trek, I could talk about it now. And so there's fun stuff showing up on social media. Jack Quaid shared some cool stuff from the crossover episode, which Frakes directed, which we included some of those. And Bill Wolkoff, who's one of the writer-producers on the show, shared some great video and images of Frakes on set. So, it's funny seeing this stuff. Like, this is totally separate, but after the strike ended, Bob Picardo posted on Twitter, I can confirm I'm in Star Trek Prodigy.
They're like, we know, we've seen some footage.
Yeah. But it's, from, that was the first time he could talk about it, from his perspective. So
yeah, Kate Mulgrew just started posting again too, saying like, it's going to be on Netflix. It's great. So it's nice to see everybody's really excited that they can talk about everything. Finally.
Right. Which is why you talked to Tawny, right?
Yes.
You couldn't have talked to her 10 days ago.
That was the first thing she said was, I'm so excited to talk about Star Trek again.
Another production update we have is the Section 31 movie that was supposed to start in October. Obviously, that couldn't have happened. We've got our first indication that they're getting ready. It's not as strong as Strange New Worlds, which is for sure happening. All we have for this one so far is a listing on the Directors Guild of Canada's site on what they call their hot list, their rumor list, really, for prep starting in November. But no real details yet, so I wouldn't write this in stone, except that it makes sense because they're already late from their perspective.
Right.
So why not? And as Fish told us when he was on this podcast, he's like, we could do both. No problem. We could share the air wall. We'll do it. No problem.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, he didn't seem to think there was any issue at all with sharing or any conflicts, and let's just go. He was just very enthusiastic about everything.
Yeah, and they did that with Discovery Season 5 and Strange New World Season 2. Both were produced at the same time, sharing sets, etc. So
yeah, they're all really good at working together at this point.
We don't have that nailed down, but it could be, and this is, you wouldn't have thought this before the strike, certainly. It could be that the Section 31 movie shows up before Strange New World Season 3.
Yep.
In theory. That
Sure.
could happen. I mean, one of the reasons I think they want to get the Section 31 movie done is because in 2024, getting back to Academy, they want to shoot the Academy, which will include some of the same people and assets and sets.
Right.
And there's no way they're going to do 3 productions in Toronto at the same time. They could do 2, but
I think it would get hard to share resources at that point.
Yeah, and sets and stuff like that. So,
right. And I also think they just want to get Michelle Yeoh and then let her get out to do all her other things that must be piling up for her.
Yeah, if she says I'm ready to go, they're just going to go, whatever that day is. But that's, so, strikes are over, things are happening. 2024, I mean, we are going to have, we still don't know when Discovery is happening. We did an article on Discovery this week. It was just another example of someone from the show who's like, I can talk about Discovery. Elias Toufexis is the new villain of the show. He actually had a very small part in season 1, playing one of those convicts. Remember when Burnham was a convict?
Oh, like right. So they went over to the Discovery.
Yeah.
And had a fight.
Yeah, he was one of those guys, but he's an alien. So, but he's like the main villain. Him and an actress are kind of the Bonnie and Clyde of this fun thing. And he's been on social media. He's talking about his cool ship and stuff like that. So
he also said it took 5.5 hours to get into makeup.
I mean, that is
crazy.
I haven't heard any I mean, yeah, because he said, especially when you do the hands, because he's got these, because to pull an alien off, you need to do all of it. And yeah, that is.
Like Doug's not in the chair for 5.5 hours.
No, Dorn, none of them. What did they say? They got Dorn down to less than an hour to get him in?
Yeah.
So I don't know what they're doing with this guy. Because when you look at the makeup, it doesn't look that radical. I mean, it's a little like a Tosk. Remember Tosk, kind of?
Yeah.
It's a little like a Kelpian. It's hard to tell what it is. Anyway, we still don't have a date for Discovery, though, but that'll be early in the year.
Yep.
And then Lower Decks will be probably later and nothing in between. But
we'll see. We don't know when Prodigy's going to land either, so.
Right. That won't be on Paramount Plus. That'll be on Netflix.
Agreed. I know.
But it'll be, hopefully it is somewhere in between.
I know. We're all worried about doubling up. So there are so many worries to have about that. But anyway, back to Lower Decks. Mike McMahon's been given a lot of interviews. So he's been talking about what's going to happen next season already, which he says will be not so much about the big missions, but a lot more about the characters sort of figuring out who they are. And he promises Tandy's coming back. She's not done, which we knew.
Yeah. Did anyone, I mean, no one thought that. Right.
I don't think so.
I mean, it is a cliffhanger, but they'll resolve it. The last time they did a cliffhanger, they resolved it right away. They don't waste time with that kind of stuff.
There's always somebody with a conspiracy theory. They kicked her off the show, whatever. I don't know. I haven't seen that. I'm just making it up now.
We're going to get more T'Lyn. Ma is coming back, the Klingon. I like the Klingon. He's cool. I don't think as much as T'Lyn, though. But I do. I mean, it's interesting how, because you and I didn't feel it was too serialized, even though by the end it was pretty serialized and it was interwoven in the story. And he's saying they're moving more to episodic because, like the previous season, you had a bit of a arc with Rutherford's eyepiece and the evil admiral and it all tied together. So it wasn't, he acts like season 4 was much more serialized. I would say it was a little more serialized.
Yeah.
And I guess they're going back to a little less, but I didn't mind it. I didn't think they went overboard on the serialization.
No, I thought they hit the right balance. Like I didn't want a lot of serialization and you didn't get it. And even if you hadn't seen previous ones and then you see another, like they would open it with a scene of some lower deckers and some aliens where their ship was, you thought, destroyed or whatever it was, it's still, you didn't need to have seen last week.
Right. So keep an eye on the site. We're probably going to post some stuff from Tawny from your interview with her. And the full audio of that will be, we're going to take Thanksgiving off because it's Thanksgiving, obviously.
It's a big holiday here in America.
But we will have a podcast the week after Thanksgiving, and that'll have the full audio of the Tawny Newsome interview.
She's fun.
So one last bit of news is this kind of curious bit of Star Trek history.
I liked watching this story unfold because there were like little pieces of it coming out. Like first of all, let's say what it's about, which is that there's a lost Enterprise model, like a 3-foot model. And the place where a lot of people saw it the most was in this picture of it sitting on Gene Roddenberry's desk. But they used it in The Cage. They used it as a shooting model in The Cage. It appeared occasionally in other episodes, and it went missing during the making of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
This was actually the first model made of the Enterprise. They later made the giant one, which is in the Smithsonian. Right. And this smaller model, after it went missing, it's kind of a big, important piece of Star Trek history. There's Gene Roddenberry was kind of pissed that it was never recovered. He wrote a letter to the head of Paramount back in the 70s saying, help me get my model back. And so it's been a mystery for years. And then randomly, this eBay posting appeared to be it, but it had a minimum bid of $1,000, which was ridiculously low if it was it. And once people started talking about it online, collectors, the eBay listing was removed. And this was at the end. I think it was on Halloween, actually.
Yep, it was on Halloween when it turned up. And then it was gone pretty quickly. And then a lot of people just started talking about how it could be, is it the right one? Is it the missing one? How do we authenticate it? And then Roddenberry got involved because he's trying to figure out, is it the real one? And if so, how do I get it? And he's now in contact with the person who listed it.
Yeah, so one of the reasons some people sent us, links to all this, why aren't you reporting on this yet? We wanted to wait to get more facts about it because we couldn't just say this thing is real. There were a lot of rumors about it. There still are a lot of rumors about it. Eventually, we did get in touch with Roddenberry. We got the statement. And so he's hoping to reacquire the model. And he feels like it should be in a museum. He wants to scan it for the Roddenberry archive. But that hasn't been resolved yet. So this is an ongoing, interesting little Star Trek mystery, and we'll continue covering it when there's more information. What's interesting is after we posted the article, some of the people who are kind of tangentially involved in the story came to our site and started commenting. And these are, people that we've confirmed. One is Gary Kerr, is a Star Trek model designer, and he was rumored to be somehow involved in this. And he came to us and said, I'm, no involvement whatsoever. And some people were saying he authenticated it, and he said, look, all I said was it looks like it's the right thing, but until someone can actually be in the same room as it, he's basing it on pictures. And then a similar comment came from the daughter of the guy who built it. She came to our site. I don't know how she found it, but she did. We are the biggest Star Trek site, so I guess it got shared around and she noticed it. And we've shared their info with the Roddenberry people, so hopefully something happens soon on this.
I'd love to know where it's been.
Well, the story, and we don't know if this is true, and there's an alternate story out there, I think, is that it was in a storage locker of some filmmaker, and this guy bought that storage locker. It has damage on it. It was not taken care of. This thing needs to be restored.
Yeah.
It's probably worth over $1 million if it's real, though.
So we all should have bought it for $1,000, is what you're saying.
Well, who knows if you see something on eBay like that, if it's real. It should have been, if it were in an auction, it should have been through like Heritage Auctions or someone like that who can authenticate it and all that kind of stuff. Right. Not just randomly up on eBay. So, we talked about the Greg Jean auction a few weeks ago. A Galileo shuttle went for $250,000. And this is the Enterprise. And it's bigger. That was 2 feet long. This is 3 feet long. It's worth a lot of money. And technically, it's the property of the Roddenberry estate, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just never returned. Not that there's any, you can't be charged for a crime from the 1970s, but one could make the argument that it's theirs.
Well, I hope they get it back.
Me too. Everyone does. I liked how Rod says this thing shouldn't be in a private collection. It should be shared with the fans and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that's it for news of the week. So we're going to roll in your interview with Walter. But before we do that, what was it like talking to an icon?
It was pretty crazy to just be looking at his face. It was on Zoom and he's looking at me and we're talking, and a couple times he did like the Chekhov accent, which was very fun. And he was laughing about stuff and making jokes, and he was totally willing to dig into his memory to recall stuff so that he could tell me about it. It was amazing. He was really, really nice. He answered all my questions. He blew me a kiss before I left, which was delightful. And he had I didn't know the story about the scene that they'd filmed for Generations that he talked about. And we'll post a link to the actual scene in the show notes on the website. So, but you should just listen and see if you're interested.
What's fascinating, as I said last week, is you don't get someone talking about a show in the 60s for one of these rewatch pods. And even in your interview, he says he doesn't really remember a lot, some of the stuff. And once he joked like, hey, I'm 87 years old, and
right.
This week we kind of got a reminder. The guy who directed The Cage, Robert Butler, passed away. And the guy who wrote the Mud episodes,
Stephen Kandel.
Yeah, and an episode of the animated. It's like a kind of 2 in 1 week, but they're both like in their 90s, So there's not a lot of people left who were there who could talk about it.
Right, who can give us those firsthand experiences. And I have to say, it was really surreal hearing him describe what it was like when he got to the set and joined the cast. And I was just a little in awe sitting and listening to him describe it when I'm thinking of all the time I spent since I was a little kid watching the original series over and I mean, I watched every episode so many times. Every time it was on TV, I was watching it. And then to think like now someone's actually talking about what it was like standing right there on the set.
So without further ado, here's Walter.
Hi, Walter.
Hi, Laurie.
Hi. So I have to just say real quick, you've been a very important part of something that has been important to me, delightful, inspiring since I was a little kid. So 12-year-old Laurie's doing cartwheels and 57-year-old Laurie is also doing cartwheels. So thank you for doing this.
We're talking about the Bud Abbott and Lou Costello show.
Yeah,
right?
my favorite. It changed my life. So let's start with you joining the 7th rule. How do you feel about joining the world of podcasting at age 87?
Well, learning something every day and also not being able to retain it. But other than that, no, that's fun. That should be fun. I'm looking forward to this.
And so I know you've occasionally watched episodes to do other interviews and podcasts, but when was the last time you really sat down and watched a bunch of original series episodes?
I don't know. I have absolutely no idea when that was. I think I've seen a couple of episodes of different iterations of Star Trek, but not the original. It's been a long time.
So this is going to be a real journey. Do you have any thoughts about what it's going to be like for you watching these episodes again?
I don't really anticipate having too many thoughts about it. We'll see. I don't know. I have no idea. We'll just see.
Are there any episodes that you sort of remember that you're kind of dreading revisiting?
That's an interesting question. I had one bad moment it wasn't an episode of the TV show. It was one of the movies, with Bill in the second movie. That was the only really bad moment that I've had in the whole history of watching Star Trek, or being involved in Star Trek.
Can you talk about that moment?
Yeah, we were getting ready. They discovered me and Paul
Winfield?
Yeah, and then we got on the transporter, and I was standing behind Bill on the transporter. We were all going to beam out. And Bill looked at me and said, move a little bit this way. He didn't want me so much in the shot. So I said, I'm just doing what you would do, Bill. Didn't like that. He said, that's neurotic. That's neurotic. And then he did a double take to look at me twice, as if looking at me twice was going to somehow cow me. So I went home and I had I had a severe gut pain for the rest of the evening. But I got over it.
And you did a great job in that movie. You had some pretty big scenes.
Thank you.
So
everybody did well.
Yeah, it's a great one. So, I know this relationship among all the actors on Star Trek, there's a lot of talk, like Shatner didn't pay attention to anybody else and he was so focused on himself. And I'm just curious about, I'm not interested in ripping apart anybody. But what was your experience on set in terms of the actors spending time together? Like, who did you spend time with and what was Shatner's attitude towards everybody?
Well, Shatner's attitude was reminiscent of the attitude of the times. When we did Star Trek the series, it wasn't a CAST, it was a CASTE. We were distinguished by our position. If you were one of the 3 stars, and this was not Star Trek alone, this was most television series, you got billing at the top of the show, which may seem inconsequential. What does that really matter? But it reflects an attitude. And the attitude is, these are the people you have to pay attention to. These people you have to defer to. These are the people who you have to acquiesce to. The people who have the top billing. Our billing was at the end of the show, and not only at the end of the show, but in between the guest stars. Now that was really subordinate. That was really a subordination. Now, did that bother me a lot? No. It was the way things were. That was the sign of the times. That's the way the casts were set up. Nobody, kicked us to the curb. Nobody was insulting. It was, you have the 2 or 3 stars, and then you have the secondary players, and that's the way it was set up. That was the structure of television. And so Bill was really only reflecting what was going on all around him. I'm sure there were situations that were not that way. That you had somebody who was a little bit more aware or cognizant, a little bit more sensitive to his fellow actors. But it wasn't as if he was being evil. It wasn't as if he was being anything other than what most people were doing. Of course, I was the new kid on the block, so I wasn't really expecting a great deal more than that. And I didn't receive it, but it didn't bother me. It bothered me a little bit. Once in a while, we'd have a scene with 6 of us, 7 of us were together, and then Bill would step to the right 5 feet, and the camera would change, and it would be on him. And it was as if we were not there. But that was the game. That was the name of the game. And George had a different beef, and his was more personal. And I respect him for it. But I don't feel the same malice that he does. So there's that to say.
So coming in for season 2 of the show, how familiar were you with season 1 and what had come before?
Wow. I'm glad you asked me. Well, let me tell you, I never saw it before I was in it. I saw the styrofoam rocks, and I said, as our beloved former president would say, fake. and that's the way I'm being facetious about beloved, by the way.
I figured. And did they show you any episodes?
Oh, well, you saw it. I mean, I was flipping channels, and I turned on this planet, and there were these rocks that obviously weighed about 1.5 pounds, you know. And so I never gave it a second thought, and nor did I try it again until I actually went in to read for it.
Oh, it's funny. And I know you're a writer, and I know coming in hot on season 2 isn't the greatest time to pitch ideas, but did you have ideas that you wanted to pitch as a writer at that time? No, I was really pleased to be working, to have a salary. Actors don't necessarily have a continuing source of income, and my very first thought about being on Star Trek was, I'm getting a weekly salary. Sure. Humanitarianism, social conscience, all people should be respected, all of those good things, which I thoroughly believe in, were not foremost on my mind. At that juncture, I was thinking about, I have a baby at home. Well, I know I didn't have a baby at home, but I was going to have a baby at home. But I did have a wife, and the income was very, very as small as it was.
I mean, it was a joke, but that was the time. That's the way things were then. But so I was very pleased to have an income, and I was very pleased to have a place to go every week, and everybody was friendly. Almost everybody was friendly. Michelle was great. She was the first one to come up to me and was friends. And, in fact, I wore a wig for 6 weeks. My hair was very short. I'd made my own film and I had cut my hair short. So I went to Max Factor and we got some wigs, and I tried a bunch of wigs and they settled on one. So, she made a joke about a bird's nest, and that was fun. And then DeForest was great. George wasn't there, as you know. Jimmy was fine. Bill sort of gave me one of those, but it wasn't insulting. It was an acknowledgement. I'm here. So yeah, it was fine. I had a third, and of course, as time progressed, and I got to see what we were doing and what we were saying, and how we were dealing with the audience, how we were treating them. It felt good. I felt that I was part of something reasonably important.
Reasonably, yes. Did you think that the show would still be being talked about 57 years later and spawn this empire, basically?
Of course. Didn't everybody?
Doesn't surprise you. Yeah.
In the third season, Jimmy, George, and I did a shoot. We went on a magazine shoot for Kids Magazine. It was either Teen or 16 or Fave or something. And we were on horses. I mean, bringing coals to Newcastle, Star Trek actors on horses. The young kids loved that. But while we were there, while we were straddled the horse, got news that, guess what? We were being changed. Our showtime in the third season was not going to be 8 o'clock Monday night. It was going to be 10 o'clock Friday night. As soon as I heard that, I mean, I was still astride my horse, and I knew that was it, that we were done. I'm cynical by nature, and I knew that we would not have I would not have the same audience that I would at 8 o'clock on Monday. They had brought me aboard for the very obvious reason of appealing to very young people, literally 8 to about 14 years old. And Friday night at 10, they're either in bed, the 8-year-olds, or they're out at a party or at a date or something, the 14-year-olds. So I knew at that moment, I knew that our fate was sealed, and that we were, and the third season of Star Trek would be the end. An interesting example of that was Spectre of the Gun, which was shot in the third season. That was written in the second season, and the intention was to shoot it in the second season. Now, that is a better reflection of Chekhov's participation in Star Trek than what we saw most of the time in the third season. Because at that juncture, we still thought we had a show, and that was going to go on and ad infinitum. But we didn't shoot it. We were short on cash. The budget was difficult to put together. And that's also one of the reasons why that old adage, mother is the necessity of invention. That's right, isn't it?
Necessity is the mother of invention?
Necessity is the mother of invention. That's because I'm 87 freaking years old. Anyway, yeah, so that's why we put it off, and we ended up making a very interesting show because we had to put it off and restructured the budget so that we could make it work. And in restructuring the budget, we played a little bit with the story and made the story more interesting, the whole thing being an illusion. We didn't have to build real sets. We could get by with far less. So, yeah, of course I'm wandering because that's what I will do. But I don't even remember what the heck I was talking about.
Well, we were talking about the surprise of the long-lasting legacy. of the show. But you know what? I'm going to ask you something else that sort of extends that thought.
Okay.
Because you did a voiceover on Star Trek Picard, and we've seen a lot of stars of previous Star Trek shows coming into new ones. But apparently you'd been approached years before Picard to appear in a different Star Trek show on Next Generation.
Well, we did the first Next Generation movie, Jimmy, Bill, and I. The initial plan was to use all 7 of us. George, Jimmy, Nichelle, DeForest, Bill, Leonard. We were going to use all of us. And then they said, no, we're just going to use Bill, Leonard, and DeForest. And they said, no. Well, Leonard and DeForest said no. They didn't see any point of going on and doing Next Generation when it wouldn't add to their characters. And frankly, although I didn't have that much character to add to begin with, so I probably could have, just on that basis, could have used the exposure, I felt that, this was not the way to sign out in a role that is obviously designed for the purpose of bringing in Next Generation fans who might not otherwise be Next Generation fans, but for their allegiance to the original cast. So it was really very calculated. And I say that, and I felt cynical about it. And I saw nothing there that I thought would contribute to an understanding of my character. So I said, thank you. And, but no thanks. And frankly, the money was quite significant, but I said, no thanks. I do have some pride. I have some pride in myself, and I have some pride in what I do. And I just didn't feel that we were bringing anything that had a great deal of merit. Oh, I was. So I said no. And they called me and said, what would change your mind? And I said, okay, I'll tell you what'll change my mind. You let me come up with a scene that will not undermine the story, that will not in any way subvert what you have going with Next Generation. That'll still be, 97% about Next Generation, but it'll be a moment for Chekhov, a moment where you get some insight into who he is. We were there in an expository fashion. George, Nichelle, and I, most specifically, and most of the time Jimmy, occasionally not so. But an expository fashion means they were there to advance the story, to tell you what's going in the plot. Captain, there's a crazy looking ship out. No, Captain, there is a thing out there. We don't know what it is. What do you think it is? Well, and then he goes on and he tells you how he feels, and you get a sense of character, and you get a sense of what that thing means in our lives personally. And that's why you have a captain, so you can identify with him, so you can get wrapped up and embrace what's going on in his life. But that isn't, we're just a tool. We're just a tool there to help expedite that, but not really to make you care about these characters. So I wanted a moment when Kirk gets blown out of the ship in the beginning of the film. There is a moment when, if you go back and look at it, where Jimmy and I stand together and we say something on the order of, I don't know what we say. We say something. And the reason why I don't know what we say is we didn't say what I had written. There was a moment between Jimmy and I when we talk about the loss of our captain. 3 years, 3 seasons of going to Paramount, and there's no more Captain Kirk. And it was painful. And if the truth be known, and I'm not sure I'm proud of this, but I had suffered a devastating loss in my life at this point. And I was able to bring that to that moment when Kirk gets blown out of the ship. And for the only time in my life that I've ever brought forth tears was during an exchange between Scotty and Chekhov. So they shot it. The writer took down what I had to say beforehand. And we memorized it. And we got on the set and we shot it. And then they cut it out. I should have known that. I mean, hello, Hollywood.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. You know, everybody talks about Hollywood, and there's a reason. So, I mean, I wasn't crushed. I think, you know, even at that tender age of 50 or whatever I was, 40, I knew that such things happen.
Right.
But that was the only reason why I did the film, was because I thought at last I got to say something about how the character should be played. And just one moment, it's not going to turn the plot upside down. It's not going to twist anything. You're not going to have to bring in other actors. You're not going to have dialogue that explains why I'm saying this. I mean, it's generated from human compassion.
Right.
I still have this yearning that he be a dimensional human being, that there be the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, that you get to see him wounded, emotionally wounded. You get to see him rhapsodizing. You know, you get to see him as a complete human being, so you can identify with him in all and the good and the not so good. I just feel that our job is, as actors, all of us, is to flesh out and make the characters as real and as pertinent as we can, to give the audience a ride, to let them embrace us, catch on, and experience what we're experiencing. That's what being an actor is. You bring that to the audience. You let them feel you're watching it because they want to be involved. They want to get the sense that they're going through what you're going through. So that's what I would have liked. I would have liked that anywhere along the line. You know, she wanted by a little old lady in Russia. That's not really something for them to grab onto. But my captain has died. How do I go on with that? That's something the audience will sit back and say, God, yes. How do I feel about that? How would I react to that? I think it was a travesty. And, you forgive me for this harangue. I thought it was a travesty the way they killed Captain Kirk. Yeah. It was so incidental. Oh, by the way, you're dead. You know, he should have died heroically. I mean, really heroically. He deserves it. And Mr. Shatner brought a great deal to that part. He was incredibly good looking. He was a damn good actor, totally committed to what he was doing. Don't talk to me about overacting. That's crap. What are you looking for? You're looking for a ventriloquist, somebody whose lips don't move? You're looking for somebody who imbues the character, who embraces the situation, who gives his all, who exposes who he is. And Bill Shatner brought that to the part every time.
I think you all had to do that. I think when you're doing a science fiction show, everybody has to buy into it 100%, or it's not going to work.
Except that when you're the lead, it's more of a challenge. You're given more to do. You're given more to do. And, you know, it's like painting with 2 colors or painting with 7 colors, you know. I'm tired of hearing, I go off and I apologize. I'm tired of hearing about bad acting, overacting. You know, I think that's bull.
I agree with you 100%. I always say the same thing about his performance in particular. I think he was brilliant.
Yeah. And when people say, come on, damn it, who has the guts to do that?
Yeah,
who has the guts to thoroughly throw themselves into the part and expose themselves like that? So, although we're not buddies, nor shall we ever be. I certainly do appreciate his work, and I'm grateful that he was there, because I'm not sure we would have come back for the movies if it wasn't for. I know Leonard had an extraordinary appeal to the audience, and certainly he was to be commended as well for the work that he did. But you got to have that leading man of some kind. Sometimes he's a bad guy, sometimes he's a good guy, but you've got the personification of the good guy that you want to root for in Mr. Shatner and Captain Kirk. And I'm grateful that he was there.
Yeah, no argument from me on any of that. Thank you so much, Walter.
Thank you, Laurie.
Bye.
So that was the interview with Walter Koenig. And just a reminder to everyone, he is going to be joining the Seventh Rule. They're starting to record next month to review and recap seasons 2 and 3 of the original series. So I actually hope they go back and do season 1 with him. But a lot of times the actors don't want to do the episodes they had nothing to do with.
Are they going to go production order or airing order?
I'm going to guess airing order.
Probably.
I think that's how they've been doing the other shows. But I think it's going to be an amazing listen. I mean, you can watch it on video too. They put the podcast on YouTube as well as on podcast sites.
So it's time for our bits of the week. This week we are going to promote some of our own appearances.
Well, we'll do each other so that it sounds less self-serving.
So Laurie was a guest in a recent episode of the great Trek, Marry, Kill podcast. And for that one, they were discussing 2 Star Trek episodes, Beyond the Farthest Star and Yesteryear from the animated series.
Yeah, it was their first time delving into the animated series. So I got the call because I was the copy editor on the book about the animated series, an authority that he knew because Brian and I have been on the podcast before. But it was lots of fun. He's a fun guy.
And those are 2 great episodes of the animated series.
Yeah, well, one better than the other.
Well, Yesteryear is... Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And then Tony was a guest. The Seventh Rule has a weekly show, a YouTube show called The Main Viewer, and they discuss all the news of the week. And they had Tony on as a guest to talk about all of the news, the production news and whatever we knew about Star Trek starting up again and all of that. And that was a lot of fun.
And we ended up talking about all sorts of stuff.
Star Wars got in there.
A lot of Star Wars. I can't help it. I love Star Wars. I'll just end up talking about Star Wars. I try to avoid it on this podcast because you're not as big of a Star Wars fan or much of a Star Wars fan as I am.
I enjoy some Star Wars. I don't keep up with all of it. It's too. I can only handle one gigantic fandom.
I get it. So check that out. It's on YouTube and on wherever you can get your podcasts. And I guess that's it. Is that it?
That's it. So have a good Thanksgiving, everybody. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Please come to the site and comment. Please go to Apple and review us, but only do it if you like us.
Exactly. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Pre-Thanksgiving.
See you in 2 weeks.